I'm delighted to welcome Professor Seirian Sumner today to talk about Big Wasp Survey, investigating social wasps through citizen science. It's a project that I've been involved in previously, helping Seirian get some of her wasps identified. And it's the smelliest job I've ever done. I don't mind saying, one of those specimen samples that were sent really stunk out our lab, but over at Bushy Park in London. But I'm really excited to hear about what happens before we got the samples and what's happening with the data and everything after we got the samples. So I'm going to hand over to you, and I look forward to hearing what the point in a wasp is.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here. And can I just say how amazing the Ento Live series is? It's just a fantastic enterprise, and I think, you know, well done to Kieran for setting it all up. Right, so I'm going to be talking today about the Big Wasp Survey, as Kieran said. So I'm a professor of behavioural ecology at UCL, which means I do teaching and research. And the Big Wasp Survey is actually a kind of, it's one of the things I most enjoy talking about, because it's kind of like a fun accident that happened. So I hope that you'll see how accidental science can actually be quite fun sometimes. So this is me. I'll just give you a little bit of background on who I am. This is me sitting in a drainage ditch in the rainforests of Southeast Asia and Malaysia, where I started off my career studying wasps as a PhD student. Above my head are lots of little brown sticks. Each one of them is a wasp nest, and the little brown dots on the nests are the wasps. I don't know if you can see my cursor. I am moving it around. I'm hoping you can. Anyway, that was 25 years ago that I started my journey into wasps, and I didn't choose to study wasps because I loved wasps at the time. I chose to study the wasps because they were really the perfect model organism to address questions about the evolution of sociality. And since then, I have continued studying wasps, and I've studied much bigger, scarier wasps, like this one in the left-hand corner here, which has got a radio tag stuck on it. That's my favourite wasp. Everybody asks me, do you have a favourite wasp? I do. It's called Plistes canadensis, and it lives in Panama. And it's my favourite because I've spent a lot of time studying it, and because we sequenced the genome of it back in 2015, and that was the first aculeate wasp genome to be sequenced. So we're quite proud of that. Anyway, since then, I have sort of realised that people actually don't share my love of wasps. In fact, if you look on the internet, you'll find that most people think of wasps as the gangsters of the insect world. And so I've kind of trying to rectify that, put a stand up for wasps. I dress up as wasps on occasion, not on Zoom calls, but, you know, it doesn't take much to persuade me to dress up as a wasp, particularly if it's a rather fine costume. I love doing outreach activities. In fact, I can see the people on the Zoom call. I've certainly worked with several of you on these kinds of activities before. And more recently, I have written a book all about why you should love wasps. It's called Endless Forms, and this is the hardback you can see here that came out in June last year, and the paperback just came out a couple of weeks ago. And so this is a very sort of public-facing book written for the general public to try and persuade everyone that actually wasps deserve a little bit more love than they currently get. Because this is how wasps are depicted on the internet. They are very much the gangsters of the insect world. They are depicted in horror movies. There's a lot of rude language. If you Google wasps, people don't hold back in explaining their feelings about wasps. So a few years ago, I got a bit annoyed about this. And together with an undergraduate student, Georgia Law at UCL, and another colleague, Alejandra Cini, we conducted a public survey to ask people to find out what they thought about wasps. And this is just one of the figures from that study. We asked over 700 people to tell us what words they think of when they first think about wasps or bees. So wasps are on the left-hand side of the screen and bees on the right. Now let's look at the bees, right? So the larger the word, the more people who use that word to describe that insect. So you can see that the words used to describe bees are very about its usefulness and its utility. So honey, pollination, but also flowers and beautiful and pretty. They're very emotive words that show that people really care about bees and that they understand what they produce and what we get from them. Wasps, on the other hand, there's pretty much only one word that people have to say about wasps, and that is that they sting. And we've repeated this survey in different countries with different audiences, and it always comes out like this. Sting is the only thing that people think about for wasps, which I'm always really perplexed about, because, of course, bees sting as well. And yet we don't seem to ever mention that. Sting is in that word cloud, but it didn't really feature nearly as much as it did for wasps. So this is kind of annoying, because actually wasps are super important. They service the environment in the ways that we value bees do, and honey and hoverflies and butterflies. And we can define the ecosystem services, the value of these insects, in terms of how they directly or indirectly support the quality of our life. It's terribly human-centric. And a few years ago, we published a big review, which is open access and anyone can read it, which explains all the reasons why, all the ways in which wasps provide services in the environment that we then benefit from. And they include things like regulating services, because wasps are the pest controllers. They regulate other insect populations. Supporting services, wasps disperse seeds, for example. Provisioning services, wasps in parts of Asia are actually a much coveted, much enjoyed source of nutrition. People eat those larvae. I mean, look how juicy. You must be salivating. Look at that, looking at that picture of larvae there. And cultural services, there are ways in which some wasp species can give us the biological indicators of the quality of the environment. So there's a lot to be grateful of for the wasps. So given this, why do people not like wasps? So in the same survey that gathered the data for the word clouds, we also asked people to tell us how much they thought these bees and wasps were valuable in terms of the services that they provide. And we specifically asked them to rate the value of bees and wasps for pollination services and predation. And these are the results. This is the ecosystem service value rating on the vertical axis here. Rating between 0, which means that insect is not remotely interesting or important for that service, to 10, which meant that that is the most important service that that insect could ever do. And as expected, people rated bees for pollination as very high, which means that it's really good, because it means that the general public definitely do understand what bees do in the environment. Bees are really important as pollinators. Wasps, on the other hand, it was kind of a random distribution. People really didn't know whether wasps were, some people rated them as being important and other people rated them as being unimportant. So people didn't really know whether wasps are pollinators or not, but actually wasps really are important pollinators. Predation was the most surprising and depressing result, because bees, if people understand that bees are not predators because they rated them as very low ranking in that ecosystem service score. Whereas wasps, if people had understood that wasps were important predators, this bar here on predation, I hope you can see my cursor, would look exactly like the pollination bar for bees. So that tells us that people don't really understand what wasps do, because of course, predation is one of the key ecosystem services provided by wasps. And we also found that depending on their interest in nature, people would were more likely to rate bees were always likely to rate bees as highly useful in their ecosystem service, no matter how interested they were in nature, whether they scored a 0 in they never go outside and look at nature at all, or they score a 10, which is kind of what this audience, I'm sure, would score in terms of you're really fascinated by nature and take every opportunity to engage with it. So this tells us that no matter how engaged with nature you are, you still understand the value of bees. Wasps, on the other hand, this was a significant result, such that the more interested in nature you think you are, the more likely you are to give wasps a little bit of a higher rating. So that was a really interesting result. But we can't just blame the public, because wasps are really unpopular with scientists. too. I'm quite a rare breed of scientist in that I've devoted my career to studying wasps. This is a figure that shows the cumulative sum of publications on wasps in blue and bees in red over the last 30 years or so. Sorry, the line should be dotted here. Take this top red line, which is the number of papers on bees over this year, and you can see that it's growing exponentially. And most importantly, it's growing much faster than it is on this blue line here, which is the wasps. So ignore these two ones here. But it's not just publications, it's also the same at conference talks. At social insect conferences, the percentage of talks that are about bees far outweigh the number of talks that are on wasps. So overall, there's about 40% more research effort that goes on into bees rather than wasps. And just to put this in perspective, there are only 22,000 species of bees in the world, whereas there's over 100,000 species of wasps. So the problem is that the public lack an appreciation of what wasps do in the environment. And as a result, the public have no reason to like wasps, so they dislike them. And this feeds into how scientists view wasps, because of course, scientists are also members of the public, and we grew up in the same cultural background as members of the general public. And so wasps are unpopular with scientists, and so wasp ecosystem services generally get very little studied. And then this feeds back to there being just simply no appreciation of wasps in the environment, because there's simply no publicity out there. There's no news, there's no science news for the public, for the media to cover. So the solution is that to try and boost the public image of wasps, and we can do this through outreach or trying to create some positive wasp imaging in the media. And then we can also try and promote scientific effort in wasp ecosystem service research. And of course, the two boost each other. And in doing this, this would hopefully produce some kind of impact on how the public view wasps, their appreciation of wasps and what they do in the environment, and make them dislike wasps a little less, perhaps. And then that would feed over into scientists valuing wasps more and wanting to study them more. And as a result, there'd be increased publicity, and therefore it would be a much happier world because everyone would appreciate wasps. So that's the kind of sort of rationale, the background for why Big Wasp Survey was actually set up. So that's the science behind it. So Big Wasp Survey was set up in 2017. So we are now, this year will be our 7th year. My partner in crime is Professor Adam Hart from the University of Gloucestershire. It was very much simply born of an outreach, a bit of a media stunt, to be honest, which then grew into something that we'd never expected to be so useful for generating really useful data. So unlike a normal science research program where you come up with the objectives and the aims at the first and then you set it up, this has kind of been a bit topsy-turvy, and it's actually quite typical of a citizen science project that it emerges from an outreach initiative that then ends up being quite good at generating data. And so the science that's come out of this has been I'll say organic. So I hope that you will sort of share Adam's and my joy in how well this has all worked out. Okay, so this is a sort of a quick rundown of what we did, or what the Big Wasp Survey involves. And I already know that some people on the call are members who take part, which is so your data is here, which is great. So what we ask the public to do is to make their own beer trap, which is just a plastic bottle, cut the top off, invert it, put some beer or orange juice in the bottom, hang it up in your garden and leave it for a week. And then after the week, collect in the wasps, wash them off, and at the time we asked them to post them to us at UCL, where we would identify them, where they'd be identified by experts. So we ended up setting up workshops, which many of you, I think, have attended and helped run, which helped us get through all the samples. And then from that, we generate maps on the distribution and diversity of social wasps in the UK. So this targets the Vespula, Dolicha Vespula, and the Vespa, so the hornets and the yellow jacket wasps. So I'm going to break this up into explaining what we did and how it went in terms of 3 categories: the good, the bad, and the unexpected, because there was nothing ugly about it at all. So the good, the first to start off with was this gentleman here is Tom Heap from Countryfile, and it's actually his fault that the whole thing started off, because Countryfile asked me to do a little recording with them to promote Wasps to their viewers, and as part of that they wanted me to do a kind of interactive thing that would get people off the sofas after the program, go out into their garden, and so it was the wasp trap seemed to be the way to do it. So Tom Heap, here he is in my neighbour's garden where we filmed, and he's made his bear trap. He's looking very happy. These are my kids from like 7 years ago, so they're much bigger now, but they were totally involved with the whole thing, actively getting involved. And in fact, this is one of the really good things about the Big Wasp Survey, because we had lots of school children involved, not because we targeted them in particular, but it just kind of spread as this kind of activity that kids could do. And we got these lovely pictures sent in to us by school groups who have been drawing wasps, really just beautiful pictures. And look at Hector. This is my favorite picture. Hector, age 5. I would love to know if Hector's out there and he sees this talk, please get in touch, because Hector, you have totally nailed it in understanding what wasps do. Look at the mandibles on that wasp. That shows that Hector knows that wasps are predators. They are catching prey and they're using their mandibles. So well done, Hector. Anyway, this is just lovely. And we got lots of media coverage, really positive. We were on the Today programme. We actually lost track of the number of radio programmes. It helps that Adam Hart is a big media presence anyway. So we were on BBC Breakfast, Sky News, even on QI we were mentioned. So I feel like we covered it. And it was really great to get this publicity, because this meant that we got people building making their wasp traps, putting them in their gardens and collecting data, which was absolutely fantastic. But there was a bad side as well. There's always that side with media coverage. You're never quite sure how it's going to go. So there was a fair splattering of skeptical media coverage. We were accused of promoting wasp killing, drowning wasps in beer. And actually, this led to Adam Hart having his own radio series on BBC on Radio 4 about the role why entomologists do sadly have to kill insects in order to study them. And we wrote an article about why we faced abuse for asking people to do this. And in fact, our survey was very carefully timed. It takes place at the end of the summer, when the workers are largely furloughed from the colony, in that they don't have as much foraging to do to feed the larvae. And so they tend to not be as useful for the colony. And it is that time of year when they become a little bit annoying as well. And people often hang out wasp traps just to keep the wasp numbers down and away from their picnics. So actually, we were not collecting any sexuals at all. There were no queens collected, no males. So it was simply the excess workers that were being collected in our traps. So we are pretty confident that it's not having any effect on the populations of wasps. Okay, so that was kind of a bad turned good, because Adam made this great series, which I do recommend you have a listen to. But it's the unexpected, which I really wanted to tell you about, because this is where the science of the wasps is really coming through. And also not only the science of the wasp, but also the science of the citizen scientists. And this was a rather, and the sort of the overflow benefits of what happened because of the success of the project, the unexpected success of the project. So first of all, participation. So in year 1, we genuinely thought that no one would sign up. In fact, we'd spoken to lots of people who've run these kind of citizen science projects on insects before, and they said, oh, you'd be lucky if you get 10 people, and 20 people might register, but only 2 people might submit their records. So, and the harder the citizen science task is, the more likely that people are going to drop out. And actually, what we were asking people to do is pretty time consuming. Make their trap, fill it with beer, collect the samples. It's messy, it's sticky, and then they had to post them to us. So it was hugely time intensive for people. So we were absolutely astonished when over 2,000 people registered just in the first year. And this is partly because we got on BBC Breakfast and on national radio. And it turns out that at the bank holiday in August, people are just looking for something fun to do in their gardens, and the Big Wasp Survey hit that spot rather nicely. So 2,000 people, over 2,000 people registered. Astonishingly, over 50% of them actually submitted their data online. They have a website where people just submit their data, and then 60% of them then sent their wasps to UCL, which again was truly astonishing. And we're very grateful to the Royal Entomological Society, who sponsored us for this, and were able to, they paid the postage for our citizen scientists to be able to send in their samples to us at no cost to themselves. So overall, just in year one, we had 6,680 wasps sent to the post room in UCL, which caused great trouble. As Kieran says, they get a bit smelly if they're in an envelope for a few days. From over 550 traps from around the country. And this is a map here showing you all the different locations. And maybe some of you know exactly where your trap was in that map. So a tremendous success. We just couldn't believe it. And year two was even bigger. Almost 5,000 people registered. Again, very high submission rate in terms of the data online, and also people sending in their traps. And this is a picture of one of my freezers. I actually had 3 freezers that look like that. All of those envelopes are full of wasps sent in for the Big Wasp Survey. It was quite horrific. We had over 30,000 wasps sitting in the freezers, and we hadn't planned for this at all. We didn't really know how to get through, because our job was then to sort them out and work out which species were there. And of course, you know, it's important that we make every single envelope matter, every single trap that people have taken the effort to collect data for. It matters. We really have to follow through with it. So 5 years on, so a couple of years ago, a BSc student at UCL, Rachel Salida, took on the task of trying to get all the 5 years data together and work out where the traps were and what kind of species were being recorded across the UK. So in total, over the 5 years, so we've had one more year since Rachel's project, we had almost 8,000 traps, 62,353 wasps, which were 5 different species of social wasps, and 3,389 participants would submit their data. So, and what we were realizing is that actually people are coming back year after year. And I think there are people on this call who are some of our super samplers who we absolutely rely on now, because they are sampling every year for us in their gardens. So we're getting repeated data points year after year, which is absolutely fantastic in terms of data collection. And you can see that we've got a pretty good spread across the UK and also in Northern Ireland. And I'll be talking in a little bit about how the distributions are might be affecting the data. So Rachel was able to break her the data down into the main species. So that's Vespula vulgaris, figure A, which is the common yellow jacket wasp, Vespula germanica, the German wasp, which is equally common as vulgaris, and Vespa crabro, which is the European hornet. And the distribution maps are pretty much what we expected. The different colours represent the different years. Vespula vulgaris and germanica are found pretty much everywhere. Crabro is largely restricted to the south, but it's definitely expanding its range northwards, and that's due to warming climates, such that queens are able to overwinter and survive. So participation was unexpectedly high, probably too high. But as a result of that, we had these thousands of wasps. We had to come up with a way to actually manage all these samples and work out what species we had. And to do this, we set up the second phase of the citizen science that emerged from Big Wasp Survey, which is the Big Wasp Sort. And we ran workshops around London and outside London, around Reading, the Reading area, where we invited members of the public to come along. We'd give them a microscope, we'd give them an identification key, and we'd provide them with experts in the room to help train them on identifying the wasps. Children came, people came back year after year to do it, and we assessed how good our workshop sorters were in identifying the species, and they were pretty accurate. The vulgaris and germanica can be a bit tricky to distinguish between the two of them, but they were almost as good as the experts in identifying this. So we were really grateful, because actually there's no way that we could have sorted all these thousands of insects, 60,000 wasps, without the help of the extended community. And so we're really fantastically grateful to them, and people absolutely love doing it. You can see these ladies here having an absolutely ball of a time. But then 2020 happened, the pandemic, and that meant that we could no longer ask people to send us wasps. We could no longer count on running workshops, because we had just no idea whether we'd be able to get people together in the same room. And so we had to come up with something else, or just abort Big Wasp Survey. And so we were quite close to pulling it. But in the end, we decided, well, let's try something new. And luckily, Adam had a student, Jess Perry, at the University of Gloucestershire, who was keen to make this her master's project. And she put together a series of videos that enabled people to identify the wasps they caught in their traps themselves. And this proved to be incredibly successful. She did a trial with blind checks, and 96% of the wasps were correct. So people sorted them themselves at home, and then they popped them in the post to her, and then she would identify them herself and check them. And 87% of people really enjoyed it, because we did a survey of how people got on with it. And we've got some lovely quotes here. I'm feeling Keith might be on this call. So it's really lovely quotes from members of the public about sharing their ideas on how they managed to get around this problem of, people didn't have microscopes at home, but Maddie used her embroidery magnifier, and Keith used his mobile phone to zoom in. So there were ways that people found to make it work. And now we don't receive any wasps at UCL. We don't run any workshops, which is kind of sad, because I really enjoyed them. But it does mean that people are able to take that second step. Not only are they sampling wasps at home, but they are also starting to learn how to identify the wasps themselves, and that's really empowering them. So online identification by the citizens themselves is now the norm, and going forward, that's how we foresee it staying the way it is. So that was unexpected. But the other unexpected thing was the educational side. So I was able to integrate Big Wasp Survey into quite a lot of my teaching, and it's generated a lot. So I got the students to help run the workshops, for example, and we've had project students, master students every year. We have a master's or an undergraduate student who makes the Big Wasp Survey their project. And that's been tremendous, because the students really love being part of the citizen science project. And as a result of this is where the actual science on wasps has really come from. So I'm going to take you very quickly through 3 of the science areas that we've been able to make progress with using Big Wasp Survey data. So the first is Big Wasp Survey, BWS, a good method for monitoring wasp populations? So we were able to do this from our 1 year of data, and we published this in 2019, just from the first year of data. And this was work done by Peggy Bevan, who was a master's student, an MRO student at the time in our lab. Now, what you've got here is a graph that compares the how spatially biased the data is across the UK. And to do this, we decided to compare our data set with the gold standard of what bees, wasps, and ants recording in the UK, which is the BWAS scheme, which has been recording wasp, bees, and ants populations over the last 40 years. So what this graph means here is that it's looking at where the sampling points are and how close they are to each other. And it basically models whether the sampling points are very clustered together, or whether they're randomly, evenly distributed across space, in other words, across the UK. And this grey line here shows what the data should look like if it was randomly distributed across the UK. And if the line is above the grey line, it means that it's very spatially clumped. So in other words, it's not randomly distributed. And this is exactly what we see with the BWAS data, which is understandable because people tend to be living in urban environments. So how does our Big Wasp Survey data compare? Well, it's still spatially biased, but not nearly so much as the BWAS data. So Big Wasp Survey is actually a valuable way of contributing to our body of knowledge about wasp diversity distributions across the UK, because it's bringing in a little bit of a less spatially biased data set, which is really fantastic. We were also able to do some species distribution models and see how well the Big Wasp Survey data just from 1 year can tell us about the species distribution. And these are the data for Vespa crabroe. So that's the European hornet. So on the left-hand side, these are the data from 40 years of long-term sample recording of Vespa crabroe from the BWAS data set. And on the right-hand side is our Big Wasp Survey data from just 1 year. And if you combine them together, you can see that the map in the middle looks very similar, if not identical, to the 40-year data set. So what this means is that just 1 year of Big Wasp Survey sampling of data is actually generating the same kind of distribution maps as 40 years of long-term data collection. So that suggests that the data that we're generating with Big Wasp Survey is definitely of really high quality. Okay, so I think you saw in one of the slides earlier some pictures of wasps in tubes. And those of you who've taken part in the workshops will know that once you sort the wasp, we put them into tubes full of alcohol, which preserves the insects, preserves their DNA. So, or does it? Because actually these wasps have also sat in a trap in the heat, in beer, and then sat in the postal room in UCL for a few days. So their DNA is likely to be quite degraded. But we were interested to ask whether we could use these samples as DNA samples to look at the population structure of social wasps in the UK. And this is a project that actually is in the final stages of revision for a journal at the moment, and it was led by Iona Cunningham-Urich together with another 2 or 3 master students who are also involved. So over several years, this has generated enough data to produce a really nice study. We focused on Vespula vulgaris, the common yellow jacket wasp. And what Iona did is she sampled wasps from traps all over the UK. But then more specifically, she sampled intensively at a regional level in the south of the UK. And then also she sampled wasps within traps. So several wasps will be collected within a trap. And we wanted to know whether the wasps within a trap are siblings, because that's what we predict for a wasp, because they're central place foragers. So they tend to they should be going to the nearest foraging range near to their nest. We predicted, therefore, that inside the traps, by sampling over 390 wasps at 15 microsatellite loci, which allows us to look at relatedness and population structure, Iona wanted to test whether the wasps within a trap were siblings, which is what we'd expect, where the queens were dispersing far. So in other words, at the local and regional level, do we see any kinds of population structure? And also whether they're across the whole national scale, whether there are any signs of any geographical or anthropogenic factors that might be limiting gene flow, such as mountain ranges, urban conurbations, or indeed the Irish Sea. So these are the results. Sorry, it's a bit geneticsy for a general audience, but these basically show that there is a single population of Vespula vulgaris across the entire UK. So what these maps show is a Mantel test, which is on the horizontal axis, it's the geographical distance, and on the vertical axis, it's the genetic distance. So what we predict is if there was restrictions to gene flow or restrictions to dispersal, that we would see a positive relationship there, such that the further traps were away from each other, the more genetically distinct they would be. But we saw no pattern of that at all. It was basically a wasp in Scotland was as likely to be related to a wasp in the south of England as it would be to a wasp in the other side of Scotland. The only exception here, and this is a structure analysis which clumps together similarly related sets of individuals. The only exception really was Northern Ireland, which showed some suggestion of having its own distinct population. Not entirely clear, but it suggests that the Irish Sea is indeed some form of barrier to some extent in limiting gene flow, in other words, the migration of queens going across the sea between Northern Ireland and mainland the UK. So this was really exciting, especially given that these samples were not collected with the intent that they would be analysed for genetic purposes, but we were able to test some key hypotheses about social wasps in their native environments. And this is particularly unusual, surprisingly enough, for Vespula vulgaris, for a common vespine wasp. Although they are well studied at the genetic level in areas of the world where they're invasive, this, as far as we are aware, is the first in-depth comprehensive study of the genetics and the population structure of a vespine wasp in its native environment. And we were able to confirm that workers do tend to forage near their nests. Queens disperse very far, but there are some geographical factors that could limit gene flow, particularly water bodies. But most importantly, actually, the real exciting thing that's coming from this research is that citizen science collected samples really can be useful. They can generate DNA that is good enough to do molecular genetics analyses on. Now, where is the science of wasps going now? Well, we are looking at a database for the future. And in 2021, during the lockdowns, another master's student set up an SQL database because the data is actually quite structured and quite hierarchical and complex, in that we have a site ID with a latitude and a longitude and a postcode. And then we have a trap ID with a site ID and a user ID, because some users put out multiple traps. And multiple replicates over different years. And within a trap, we have wasps, which need to be identified, and they're within a trap, and we have species and the number of wasps in a trap. So you can see that's multi-layered. So we really do need a relational database to make sense of this. And so this is what we're working on now. And we're taking this, we're hoping to combine all of our 7 years of data this year and put this as an accessible database on the Big Wasp Survey webpage, so that anyone can access it, whether they're a scientist or a member of the public. Okay, finally, I just want to touch on the data to do with citizen science. And this was part of the project that Rachel did in 2 years ago. So she really interestingly, she was very interested in what motivates the scientists to take part, and who are these people, are they a particular demographic? And she found that people living in rural areas were more likely to take part than people living in urban areas. And in fact, people in villages were 5.73 times more likely to take part than expected, based on the population spread. Large towns were less likely, 67% less likely to have participants taking part. The Midlands and London exceeded our expectations, particularly in the Midlands. I don't know what's going on in the Midlands, but people in the Midlands absolutely love Big Wasp Survey, with 18.7 times more than expected numbers of people taking part based on population size. But we do have very poor participation in Scotland and in Northern Ireland. So those are areas that we definitely should probably be trying to encourage more sampling to take place. Interestingly enough, we found that there was a higher participation in regions with higher socioeconomic status. There are many sociological reasons why that actually is expected. And intriguingly, we wanted to know that if you caught wasps one year, were you more likely or not to take part the following year? Because having this participation, this retaining our citizen scientists over years, is actually one of the really big challenges of citizen science. And it seemed like we were being able to retain people. And indeed, Rachel found that catching any wasps in a trap does mean that you're more likely to take part in the future. But the number of wasps in your trap had no effect. So if you just caught one wasp, that was enough of an effect to encourage you to take part next year. But if you caught 50 wasps, it wasn't really going to make any difference at all. So I thought this was really interesting insights into the sort of sociology of the citizen science perspective behind the Big Wasp Survey. So the good, bad, and the unexpected of the Big Wasp Survey: we have a high level of participation for a very uncharismatic, unloved insect. We had astonishing media interest, too much probably, but amazing. And that's why we managed to get these big samples of the citizens taking part. And unexpectedly, it's produced lots of really high quality data, which allows us to address lots of different questions about the science of wasps, which of course is quite understudied. So where are we going now? Well, in the short term, We are looking at the geographic distributions of wasp abundance and species composition across the UK. We're looking at the effects of land use on the distribution and abundance of wasps. We're interested in seeing whether we can detect the immigrants, so particularly the unfriendly immigrants, the Vespa velutina, which is the Asian yellow-legged hornet, which is over most of southern Europe now, and we get the occasional visitor in the summer. It's important that we keep monitoring for velutina, and also Genetics of Vespula, which actually is underrepresented in our sample because the colony cycles tend to end much earlier in the season than the Vespulas. And so in the last couple of years, we've actually been asking our super samplers to sample at the beginning of August, which is the end of the Genetics of Vespula colony cycle, as well as the end of August, to capture the Vespa and the Vespulas. And that's been really successful as well. So we've got this sort of time aspect in our sampling as well. And in the long term, well, it's already doing this now. It's already an annual event, perhaps not on the scale of the Garden Bird Survey, but certainly we are retaining our super samplers. We haven't advertised for new samplers for years now. We've just been basically nurturing and keeping our super samplers on board. And we want to, in the long term, 10, 20 years, look at these long-term changes in population abundance and distribution, which is especially important given climate change. You can see that crab roe is already expanding further north, and also being able to detect these unfriendly immigrants. So how does this all fit into the big vision, the framework of why we think that this the outreach and citizen science can help boost the public image of wasps? Well, we think it's kind of doing its job. I mean, the fact that all of you have turned up today to this talk, my hunch is that if I'd given it 8 years ago, there would have been like 10 people turning up because people were interested in wasps. I kind of get the feeling, can't really measure it, but I sort of get the feeling that there is an underlying quell of interest now in wasps. Partly the Big Wasp Survey has helped that. I think it has definitely increased the publicity, and the public are generally, once people understand that wasps are actually really important in the environment, people actually come on board and think, actually, yeah, I totally get why we should be valuing wasps as much as we do bees and other insects. So that's it from me. Thanks to, I mean, this isn't a fraction of the number of people involved with Big Wasp Survey. We've had huge supports from people like Kieran in the past, the Natural History Museum, Bushy Park, all sorts of people have been really instrumental in helping making this happen. But the key partners are Adam Hart, my co-founder of Big Wasp Survey, and my partner in crime in every way, wasp related. Chris Thompson, who is actually our good friend who made our website for us and is incredibly generous with his time, because we actually have this project runs on no money, with the exception of the Royal Entomological Society, who have provided the sponsorship for the postage over the years, and so they are our main sponsor. Thanks to all the students who've helped run the workshops, who've really engaged with it and absolutely love coming to the lab in their spare time and sorting wasps, and the citizen scientists, both those in the fields putting their traps out, but also the amazing people we've worked with at the workshops, and the masters and undergraduate students who have really generated the science from this huge data set. If you'd like to learn more about the science of wasps, of course, you can read my book, which is just out in paperback, but also you can have a look at my lab website, sumnerlab.co.uk. We are actually interested in people getting involved this year, so we're not going to do a big call, but if you know, if you'd like to take part, you can go to our website and register. Registration is not open yet, but it will be quite soon. If you're fond of computer games, we've also got this computer game that you can play about wasps and building a colony and seeing all the hazards of running a colony. And then for people who have younger children, this is geared towards 11 to 13-year-olds. A Frontiers for Young Minds article where I talk about basic reasons why you should not swat the wasp. Thank you so much for listening.